Okay, so Noah's Ark and giants. So this is a picture of the Ararat region. On the right side of your screen, you have Greater Ararat. Uh, on the left side of your screen, you have Lesser Ararat. It is a massive area. And you can look at a picture of it, you can see it online, but unless you really have a concept of just the enormous space, it's hard to envision just how vast this area is. And it's volcanic. That lesser peak there on the left hand side came up later on. And um, we're going to watch a short clip. Some of you know who Leonard Nimoy is, Mr. Spock from Star Trek. There used to be this old show called In Search of, and they did an episode on Noah's Ark. And this is from 1978, a long time ago now. And you'll hear the voice of Leonard Nimoy. And then I took the liberty of splicing in a clip of Pastor Doug Batchelor towards the end. Doug Batchelor was not in search of Noah's Ark, so that's a splice. So let's hear the clip.
Bible scholars have estimated that the deluge would have killed 1 billion humans and 35 trillion animals. They say that is exactly what God intended, to erase a wicked, violent world. So, searching for proof of Noah's flood is like trying to solve the greatest mystery story of all time. Clues are everywhere and have been found in the most unexpected places. The Bible says, "And the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat." For more than 2,000 years, mountain climbers have told of a huge ancient boat hidden in the glaciers of a mountain called Ararat near the Russian-Turkish border, and now surrounded by top-secret missile sites. On every continent are countless cultures, each with its unique collection of myths. At least 200, amazingly, tell the same story of an ancient flood.
We have a story like Noah from India, too. And it's about Manu, who caught a little fish, who told him about the flood. And so he went and built himself a boat, because of which he survived. And when the water went down, he found himself on top of a mountain, which is still called Manu's Descent. And when the water receded, it left the valleys that we still see in India today.
Among the Cherokee Indians, in the tales of the Cherokees, the coming of the flood was told by a dog to his master. "You must build a boat," the dog said, "and put in it all that you would save, for a great rain is coming that will flood all life."
There was an Indian man who came and saved all the animals and put them in his canoe.
Even evolutionary scientists were puzzled by this consistency.
There you have it, 200 flood myths around the world. The evolutionists can't account for it. People in their cultures, they repeat these stories. They've been passed down for many, many generations. And today, we are looking at the story of Noah's Ark again. It's worth mentioning that many classical writers noted the existence of, or the legend or the rumor of Noah's Ark in the mountains of Ararat. Josephus, reading from Book 1, Chapter 3 in the book Jewish Antiquities, mentions a writer by the name of Berosus the Chaldean. And as far as I understand it, Berosus's writings have been lost to us, but they are mentioned by Josephus. Marco Polo wrote about it. So there are there's lots of history to say that people believe that it was there, and rumors of people seeing it. And you heard Leonard Nimoy at the beginning say that for centuries, for millennia, that there has been a rumor that there is a ship underneath the ice near the top of Mount Ararat. It's fascinating. And so this is an article from December 26, 2025, where, again, you're hearing these rumors that that the ark has been found. And you can see the picture there this is what's called the drip in our sight, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. And this presentation, though, is going to have three parts. First of all, what does the Bible say? Part two is possible locations, and part three, we're going to touch on giants just a little bit. Okay, so the biblical background, if you're new to this podcast, if you're watching it for the first time, if you've never seen a presentation on Noah's Ark before, it's a big subject. And not just those classical writers that I mentioned talk about it, but the Bible talks about it extensively in conjunction with the creation and then destruction, the first time, of the ancient world. And so the Bible says that God saw the wickedness of man, that it was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth. And so he looked over the earth, and he could see that people were degraded and immoral and violent, and all they thought about was wickedness. And so the world was slated for destruction the first time. And this story makes a lot of people uncomfortable because they think to themselves, well, this is not a real event. There was no such thing as a flood, and there's no such thing as God, and we're not accountable to anybody. And so this narrative in society, this is just a myth. But archaeologists, geologists, people who have traveled the world on every single continent have found evidence of a great flood that destroyed the old world. But the water levels came up quickly and submerged the world. And you find the forests, and you find the animals that died and were buried in that great deluge, a very violent ending to that chapter of Earth's history. And evolutionists who at one point in time denied that there was a flood now say, okay, all right, we see the evidence. Seashells on the tops of the mountains and the fossil record, and we see the dinosaurs, that they were buried and then covered up, and the vast forests. Okay, we agree, there was a flood. But it happened millions and millions of years ago, and an asteroid hit the ocean, and it covered everything up, and it brought the ice age, etc. Now, Genesis 6 continues. It says that God, as he was looking at the earth, he said, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the ark. Make with the earth, make thee an ark of gopher wood. Room shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. So make it waterproof and tight. God pointed out the type of wood, gave Noah instructions for the purpose of saving the world. And so that's one of the things that you see in the story, is that God cares about humanity. He hates the violence. He hates the wickedness of mankind. But he is also saying, here's a way of escape. Come into the ark. Be safe, you and your families. And so Noah, we're told in the scriptures that Noah was a preacher of righteousness, that he preached, in fact, for 120 years. And then the waters came. Today, the earth is one massive crime scene. People consume an enormous amount of violence on television. Our world is full of violence. There are homicides that would chill your blood every single minute that there is life on this planet. Just about every hour, there are multiple homicides on this planet all around the world. And lots of those homicides are unsolved. And there won't be accountability until the Lord metes out accountability. But we know that we live in an exceedingly wicked world. All you have to do is turn the news on. You read about Epstein. You read about all of his people who suffered because of what he did. You read about the corruption in government and in the high profile elite people of the earth. And you look at the wars that are taking place right now, and the greed and the corruption and the lying. And there are many indicators as to why Well, God specifically says, he says why the earth was destroyed the first time. It was because of violence. It was because of wickedness, the thoughts of men's heart being wicked. It was only evil continually. And additionally, we are told in the spirit of prophecy that one of the reasons why the Lord destroyed the earth, I don't have this quote on the screen here, but here is the quote from the spirit of prophecy, that there was enormous crime before the flood, terrible violence, but if there was one sin above another which called for the destruction of the race by the flood, it was the base crime of amalgamation of man and beast, which defaced the image of God and caused confusion everywhere. And so there was genetic manipulation. And people think, oh, yeah. But the evolutionists say that humans' ancestors were cavemen. They didn't have science. There couldn't possibly have been any amalgamation. But you look at what's taking place today, and humans are amalgamating things today. You read about beans that have pig DNA in them, so that when you cut the bean open, it's pink inside, or rats growing human ears, or pigs that glow green because of the DNA from some ocean creature. And so this is definitely taking place. And there are darker rumors about other things, the splicing and combining of humans with animals. We'll talk a little bit about that. So it's not a news flash, friends, that this world is exceedingly wicked. It is very violent, and that people have forgotten God. And the Bible says very specifically that it was these factors which led to the destruction of the old world. In fact, the book of Genesis is very specific indeed. It says that it was in the 600th year of Noah, that it was in the final year of the life of Methuselah. In fact, Methuselah's name means when I die, it will come, or it will be sent, referring to the great event that had been prophesied. So Methuselah, 969 years old, he died before the flood. And so there are very specific dates for the start, duration, and end of the flood and departure from the ark, which is fascinating. Because you would think to yourself, if this was just a mere myth, if this was just a fairy tale, why was God being so specific about the dates? And you'll see that that's the case here. Genesis chapter 7, verse 1, the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark. For thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. And so you have this warning from God to the people of the old world that judgment is coming. Come into the ark. There is space. And Noah and his family, they go into the ark, and the animals go into the ark. And then the door is shut. And that is the close of the time allotted to humanity in that age. When the door shuts, that's it. No hand could open it again. And then Noah and his family were in the ark, Bible says, for 7 days. And then the floods came. And you could just imagine what it would be like to be Noah. You think Noah was a popular man? No, he's not a popular man. He was lampooned and derided and mocked in the newspapers of his day. When his wife went to the grocery store, people were like, there's Noah's wife. He's crazy, and so is she for staying with him. And it was notorious because Noah wasn't just preaching for a few months. The Bible says he preached for 120 years, warning the generation of his day that the flood was coming and that there was a way of escape. And so God made an arrangement to keep life on the earth. You know, you see the reference to the clean beasts that are 7 by 7. They go in, and then the unclean beasts, and then the fowls of the air, and then the males, the Noah's family. And then it was God's stated intention to Noah. It was very specific. You're going to go in to the ark. The door is going to get shut. You're going to be in there for 7 days, and then it's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Very, very specific. And it says, Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. Genesis 7, verse 6. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. And they go in. And then it says, verse 11, there it's highlighted for you or in bold, in the 600th year of Noah's life. It's interesting that it was the 600th year. Again, very specific. And that's, may have shades of another event that comes at the end of the millennial weekly cycle. In the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were open, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So does God mean what he says? Yes. And this great calamity in the Bible is said to have taken place. Now, it's fascinating when you come to the question of Noah's Ark that this is taken from Wikipedia here, that for a long time there has been knowledge of some sort of something up close to the summit. Mount Ararat is nearly 17,000 feet. It says here in Wikipedia, you see different height estimates. I don't know why exactly that is. It's very close to 17,000 feet. Here it says 16,854. And you can see that what is referred to as the Ararat anomaly, there's the GPS coordinates. It's not a secret anymore. You can look at it on Google Earth at about 15,500 feet. This is the Ararat anomaly. And so it's close to the summit. And like Leonard Nimoy said at the beginning, at that piece, it's the rumors have had for centuries that there's something underneath the ice. This anomaly was originally photographed during a U.S. Air Force mission. They were doing aerial reconnaissance and mapping in the Turkish Russian region. And the story goes is that, and you can read the accounts online, that there was a craft and they were doing mapping, and all of a sudden they see something sticking out of the ice. And they're like, that's a ship. And some accounts, and it wasn't just the Americans, there's a Russian account as well. Very similar a few years earlier, I think 1940 is the Russian account. But again, a very similar set of circumstances. They're doing mapping, reconnaissance, and they look at the mountain, and there is something sticking out from underneath the glacier near the height, near the top. And so, of course, the photograph was classified. It's not a great picture. I have a bigger copy. You see in the upper right-hand portion of your screen, something sticking out of the ice right at the corner there. Okay, so this is again from 1949. It's interesting that the anomaly was photographed in 1956, 1973, 1976, 1990, and 1992 by both aircraft and satellites. Now, we have these images because there was a Freedom of Information Act request from a guy by the name of Porcher Taylor. He is a professor, as far as I know, still, unless he's retired, at the University of Richmond in Virginia. He wrote a number of papers on the subject. And so some of these photographs have been released. Now, I want to talk about the search for Noah's Ark in the context of the Bible, because the most complete account of the destruction of the old world, the flood, and the Ark of Noah, including its final resting place, is in the scriptures. There are many other flood myths. There's the Gilgamesh epic, for example, and you can see the similarities in the stories and all of these different cultures which have the stories. But a lot of Christians today, they don't believe in the Bible. It's incredible. You read these surveys that are coming out now, September 6, 2025. Almost half of all Americans and many Christians don't believe they're sinners. So not only do they not read the Bible, they don't even think that they're sinners. They don't even believe in an objective such thing as sin, that there's such a thing as an objective sin. Like, this is wrong because the commandment says it's wrong. it's very postmodernistic in a lot of people's minds. Well, this is sin sort of over here or over here. Maybe that's a sin sometimes, but you can rationalize it away. And so you can see a striking number of Christians don't believe they're sinners. Among those who claim to believe in sin, a majority contend there are no absolute sins. Research found that less than half of born-again Christians believe Jesus lived a sinless life on earth. That's a study from 2023. It's remarkable, the deterioration in Christianity. And, that's not me saying that. That's all the polls that say that. What is Christianity? If Christianity is not believing in the Bible and what it says, then what is it? You just make it up as you go along. I'm a Christian because I feel like a Christian. I'm not a sinner. There's no sin. Why do you need a savior? And certainly they don't believe in the Genesis account of creation. This is from another Gallup poll. This is from a number of years ago already. In the U.S., belief in creationist view of humans at a new low, 38%. February 18, 2025, more than 50% of U.S. evangelical Christians do not believe in the Genesis history of creation. They don't believe in Genesis. They believe in evolution. And you've heard the popes of Rome, starting with Pope John Paul II, and then to Benedict XVI, and then to Pope Francis, and then reaffirmed by this newest Pope, Leo, that God created through the process of evolution, as though he sort of set it in motion and then he disappeared for millions and millions of years. But there was no literal account of creation. And that raises the question of, why would you need a savior? If there's no such thing as sin, if there was no fall, if there was no God create him and Adam and Eve, right? That if there was no time when there was no death, because natural selection involves the idea of death. That's what natural selection is. You have these species, they evolve, and they exist for a period of time, then they replicate, they mutate, and they die, and then their ancestors die, and it just sort of progresses over the course of millions and millions of years. And it starts with little amoebas, and then they crawl around, and they become snails, and then they become lobsters, and then they become fish, and then they become iguanas, and then they become chimpanzees, and then they become human beings. And this is what evolution teaches. But this is what the papacy says is true now. And this is, according to this study here, this is what the evangelical Christians believe today as well. That you're a product of evolution, that you came from a lobster, 50% of them, throwing the Bible out the window. If you don't have a literal creation, you don't have a fall, Jesus doesn't have to die for anybody. Why would he have to die for the descendants of the lobsters and the crustaceans? Why would he need to do that? Either the Bible's true from start to finish, or it's not true at all. Either you're with Darwin 100%, or you're with Jesus in the Bible. But there's no middle ground. And so there's this confusion that has come into Christianity, and people are like, well, I'm an evolutionist, but I believe in Jesus. Praise the Lord. Well, how does that work exactly? And what do you believe about Bible prophecy and end time events? Well, they're pretty fuzzy on that too, turns out. And so the story of Noah is more than just a question of, well, is there an ark or is there not an ark? The story of Noah has to do with the origins of humanity, the fall of mankind, the punishment for sin, the destruction of the old world, which is a warning about the destruction of our world today, for the same reasons exactly that the original old world was destroyed. That's what the Bible says. That's what Christianity says. Can you still be a Christian if you don't believe in Noah? Well, let's ask that question. What does Jesus say? If you believe in that Christianity is following what Jesus Christ says, what does Jesus say? Matthew 24:37. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Sounds like Jesus thinks Noah's a real person, doesn't it? He's certainly referring to him as a real person. The days of Noah. You don't have the days of fictional people. Jesus is referring to the flood. When I come back, he's saying, It's going to be just like it was in the days of Noah. You look around the world today, is it just like the days of Noah? Oh, yes, it's just like the days of Noah. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and they knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Lord and Savior, is telling you when he comes back, it's going to be like the days of Noah. And just like the waters of the flood took all those people away who refused to get in the ark, that's what it's going to be like when Jesus comes back. The wicked are going to be destroyed. So can you be a Christian if you don't believe in Noah? You're going to call into account what Jesus Christ says, Matthew and the book of Mark as well. What about other people in the Bible? You have Genesis specifically recounts the story of Noah, but then you have Noah being mentioned in 1 Chronicles 1:4, and so he's a real person. He's referred to by the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel as though he's a real person, because he's a real person. He's not Bigfoot. And then you have Jesus, Peter, and Paul all saying Noah's a real person, as it was in the days of Noah. Peter specifically invokes in 2 Peter, the Apostle Peter specifically invokes the flood as a symbol of what's going to happen at the end, where the world is destroyed by fire. And he's like, just like it was in the days of Noah when they were making fun of Noah, and then the water came and swept them all away. That's what's going to happen at the end. People are going to be preaching, and there's going to be scoffers. Peter says there's going to be scoffers who arise saying, we've heard about the days of the Lord for all these years. Nothing's going to happen. Peter says that's exactly what the world is going to look like right before Jesus comes back, and the world is destroyed by fire. Now, today in Christianity, you hear all about a golden age. There's a golden age coming. Everything is going to be of gold. Kumbaya, the nations of the world. That's not what the Bible says. That's not what the Apostle Peter says. So can you be a Christian if you don't believe in Noah? You should ask yourself that question. Now, there's global evidence of a worldwide flood. Recently, I guess within the last few years here, they have been more and more talking about the massive forests that are underneath Antarctica. And there was reference to them when Robert Falcon Scott crossed the continent for the first time, and they were like, "No, he made a mistake." His scientists said that there were big leaves there with fossils, like beech leaves in shape and size, and we don't believe that that's the case, but that's been proven now, abundantly proven. Again, you have the remains of a 90 million year old rainforest. Again, they say 90 million years old. That's their timeline. That's not what the Bible teaches, but even the evolutionists say underneath the ice, there's vast forests, rainforests. How'd they get there? The planet at one point in time was habitable down at the bottom at the South Pole. It was lush. It was beautiful. Lots of trees and ferns. The air was nice. Temperature was mild. That's the way it was. How'd it get covered up by ice? You know what ice is? That's water that's frozen. How'd the forests get covered by ice? All right, so this is a view, again, just so that you have the context. This is on the right side of your screen, this is Mount Ararat. This is Big Mount Ararat. In the background there, you have Lesser Ararat. Again, that's the one that came up after both volcanic. And then you have the Ararat anomaly, kind of sitting on an edge there. So you see where most researchers who have been up Mount Ararat, that yellow circle on the left is where most researchers focus their search. The fact is that to this date, there has not been a documented trip to the Ararat anomaly. Now, you can only go up Mount Ararat at all and look at anything for 2 months out of the year. I think that's either August and September or July and August, because there is a permanent glacier at the top of Mount Ararat, and it covers whatever is up there. And so the window is very small. And for most of recent memory, this territory has been controlled either by the Turks or the Soviets. It's a no-go zone. It's a military zone. There are military bases there and um, missile depots and things like that. And so getting permission to go up Mount Ararat until relatively recently has been difficult. There's been lots of expeditions, but again, they go to that area where the yellow circle is on the left. Now, again, Mount Ararat, just for context here, 17,000 feet nearly. It's a massive area, 132 square miles. It's huge. There's a glacial cap on top of the mountain that's ever present and only shrinks meaningfully in exceptionally hot, dry years. Sort of tuck that detail away because we're going to come back to that. So this glacier is there, and according to the scientists, climatologists, people who look at this, that glacier is always there, and it only recedes when it's very, very hot and dry. There was a massive eruption in 1843. It blew out 1/6 of the mountain, not where the Ararat anomaly is. Interesting date. Again, there's the picture of it. Okay, just a few more flood legends before we get into the locations, the possible locations for the Ark. So in Hawaii, they have a legend about a man named Nuu. Some people say Noe. I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced. But a man, again, he was a man who had a big, huge canoe and saved all the animals. In China, they have a myth about somebody named Nuwa. And some people will say, well, those symbols are female. But actually, when you look at Nuwa and the letters, you can see the reference down there at the bottom. Nuwa is regarded as an ancient Chinese ancestor and hero. The Chinese characters in this name are used not for their meaning, but for their sound. Thus, Nuwa could be indicated as the ancestors of the Chinese. This is the symbol for chip in Chinese. Fascinatingly enough, it is comprised of, you see on the right there, the symbol for 8 and mouth, 8 people, 8 mouths in the ship, right? We know that there was 8 people on the Ark in the Genesis account of the flood. And then we come to this, which again is relatively new, February 27, 2026. There's been some coverage of this online. The explosive Bible theory that links Noah's Ark to the 8 modern blood types in humans. So how many blood types are there? There's 8. That's interesting because there was 8 people on the Ark. And so this has garnered some attention online. It was reported in the Daily Mail. It created quite a stir when this started to be talked about. Why 8? Why not 80? Why not 800? If humans evolved over the course of millions and millions of years, why is it 8? Why is that the number? If you look at the mathematics and you look at the population of the Earth, approximately, if you take the number 8 and advance it forward from the time of the flood to the time of today, you get a population of approximately 8 billion people. And if you look at the genetics of people and the deterioration in their mitochondria, the evolutionist says, well, this is millions and millions and millions of years old. But the mitochondria of people and the degradation of their DNA points to a young Earth, a young human genome, not an old humanity. So that's interesting. Also, you can look this up, that you can trace back every person on the Earth to a common female ancestor, and they have now said you can trace all humans back to a common male ancestor as well, which is fascinating. So everybody alive goes back to to 2 people. It's fascinating. Now, originally, the evolutionists said, well, the female was hundreds of thousands of years before the male, but recent research has confirmed that the male ancestor lived at about the same time as the female ancestor as well, and may even be a little bit older. So that's fascinating, considering what the Bible says. And this is the thing about a lie. When Charles Darwin originally looked at the finches and evolution and the idea of the cell, the microscope was very rudimentary. It was not advanced like it is today. And so when he's looking at the cell and he's thinking, okay, all right, it's fairly simple. And scientists were saying, it's plausible that humanity evolved. Now you know that a single cell is as complex as a city at rush hour with its elevators and its traffics and its movement and its complex processes. And so for a long time, year by year, the threat has been to evolution, not to creation, because the more people learn and the more people understand, the more they see that evolution is in trouble. The laws of thermodynamics, for example, that things tend to deteriorate, not get better, right? Things don't get better, they get worse. They deteriorate and degrade over time. And so, anyways, the proof is in the science, and eventually there will be more. Okay. Again, going back to the question of amalgamation, again, it's, I don't know if you could say it's generally accepted, but it's certainly accepted in many circles that that the COVID virus was a result of gain of function research and that it leaked from a lab, as opposed to being from a wet market and something that developed in nature. When they analyzed the DNA, it looks like it's been manipulated, that it's a product of amalgamation, that it is a product of interference, human interference with a natural virus, and that it was calculated to become more virulent, that it was engineered to be more dangerous, and then that it leaked on the public. So you got human pig hybrids that were created. This is 2017, reported in National Geographic. Again, so you have humanity doing the same things, which we're told were taking place before the flood. One of Epstein's victims says that she was taken to a top secret base and she saw human animal chimeras. Is that true? I don't know. But it's certainly something that could be true. We're a long ways from Dolly the sheep. And even though it's outlawed in many Western countries to do human-animal amalgamations and attempt to create a chimera and bring it into existence, that doesn't mean it's not taking place. There's all sorts of things that aren't supposed to be happening that are taking place, and there have been for a long time. This again, December 3rd, 2025, scientists are growing human organs in animals, and it's working. This is a picture of, again, there are many stories, legends, pictures now from underwater archaeology. The use of LIDAR has opened up the field of archaeology, both in forests and underwater, to see incredible structures that have long been hidden. And but here's this Yonaguni monument, 90 feet tall, submerged off the coast of Japan. The evolutionists say, oh, it's just a natural formation. Is it? You've heard the rumors of Atlantis. There are vast forests that were covered by water, encased in ice. You could go to Siberia and to the islands north of Russia. Today, you could pay for tours, and you can go dig for woolly mammoths that still have hair and bones and meat. And you could watch videos of them exhuming these creatures. And they found a dire wolf up there recently, which is an extra big wolf that is long gone extinct. And so these things were wiped out. And they're encased in ice because it happened fast. They still have their last meal in their stomach. You can see what it ate. All right, uh, let's look at the two sites that vie. People talk about the two sites where Noah's Ark may be. One is the Daripanar site. This is from just a few days ago. Scientists say everything aligns. Could Noah's Ark really be hidden beneath this mysterious mountain mound? March 10, 2026. So this is the site, and they're talking about archaeological excavations right away here this year. This is called the Daripanar site, and it is named after a Turkish soldier by the name of İlhan Daripanar. And they found pottery pieces there. You can see that it kind of looks like a boat. A lot of people say this is a geologic formation. So there's a national park that has been created there because of this site, because of lobbying to make this a park. So they did. And this is the Jerusalem Post here. Researchers claim discovery of Noah's Ark remains in Turkey's Daripanar Formation. So they're going to dig. And there are a number of stories, people who have said that this is the site for Noah's Ark. It's at approximately 14,000 feet, so it's lower than the Ararat anomaly. So the first thing that you should know is that there's at least two sites, maybe a third site in the Ararat region where people have said they think that it could be. This site was specifically exposed in 1948 during heavy rains, discovered by this man, Daripanar, long thought to be a natural geologic formation. There was sampling that commenced. Teams say that they found wood. Some people say that there are ballast or anchor stones there, and there's going to be a dig. And some people say that there's been scans, and there seems to be space under the surface. But those scans using that kind of technology have to be interpreted. And until you dig, you really don't know. And it is 18 miles from the summit. Now, in 1948, there was a newspaper article that came out. Turk reports a ship atop Mount Ararat. Turkish peasant, there's another article here, finds ship on Mount Ararat. Petrified remains of an object. And so that's interesting because this story, when this was released, the peasant who was up on the mountain says that the ark was petrified. With the Daripanar site here, this wood, they're saying, some people are saying, is not petrified, that it's just old wood. But that excavation is going to take place, and there'll be more information. Now, it's interesting because in this article, of course, this is from the paper in 1948, November 13th. The petrified remains of an object which peasants insist resembles a ship has been found high up on Mount Ararat. Apparently hidden for centuries, it came to light last summer when unusually warm weather melted away an ancient mantle of snow and ice. While various persons from time to time have reported seeing objects resembling a house or ship on the mountain. It's been going on for centuries. So this farmer who owned a large acreage told about the discovery, and he says that there was a peasant named Reshit, and he was 2/3 up the way of the nearly 17,000-foot peak when he came upon an object he had never seen before. You can see the details there. It was the prow of a ship protruding into a canyon down which tons of melting ice and snow had been gushing for more than 2 months. The prow was almost entirely revealed, but the rest of the object was still covered. It's shaped like a ship. He climbed down to it and with his dagger tried to break off a piece of the bow. It was so hard it would not break. It was not a simple rock formation. I know a ship when I see one. This is a ship. And so it's interesting because this story, which was released in 1948, this site was later associated with the Daripanar site. partly because I think that the farmer who heard the story from Reshit says it was 2/3 up the mountain, which is closer to 14,000 feet than it is to 15,500 feet. But again, that's secondhand information that was relayed to the farmer. Other people climbed up the mountain on the northern slope. Again, that's another detail for you to see the weird thing he had found. Each who came back said it was a ship. An expedition from America last summer was reported coming to see if it could find remains of the Ark preserved in the ice atop Mount Ararat. The international situation and fighting in that area had complicated plans and that the expedition could not get clearance and get ready in time. Mount Ararat is frozen 10 months of the year. August and September are the only 2 months of thaw. So there's been many different roadblocks, right? War and hostilities with various governments, people not being able to get over there, weather, etc. But there's a published report that there were peasants going up and looking at this thing, that it was petrified, that it was on the northern slope, that it was sticking out from underneath the glacier. Fascinating, because that sounds a whole lot like the 1949 pictures that was taken by the US Air Force of a ship that was sticking out from underneath the glacier. You saw that photo at the beginning of this presentation. All right, so the Diripanur site again. This is planning. Now, this is not the Ararat anomaly, but that story, that last story that I read you just now, has come to be associated with the Diripanur site, even though it's in a different location, even though it's 18 miles from the summit, even though there's no petrified wood that has been found there to my knowledge. And so is it possible that the Diripanur site is different than the 1948 site that was discussed in that article in Turkey? Yeah, it's possible. Maybe it's probable because it doesn't seem to fit.
A piece of Noah's Ark would be the greatest archaeological find of all time and would discredit the theory of evolution.
I threw that clip in there from Leonard Nimoy, but you hear what he said. If you could find the Ark, it would discredit evolution, and of course it would. Because your lobster ancestors didn't build a big ship and put it up on Mount Ararat. Obviously, if Noah's Ark, if there's something up there under the glacier, which is man-made, and it's a massive ship, then that would discredit evolution. Yeah, I would say it would. Now, we don't believe in evolution, even if Noah's Ark isn't found, because the Bible clearly outlines how humanity started and that God created the earth.
Jay,
Yes.
So you're saying that there are two sites right now. We have these pictures of the Diripanur, but the other one that you think that was found, I think higher up on Mount Ararat, that one we don't have any recent photos or sightings of necessarily.
So that anomaly, there was a National Geographic article that that came out a number of years ago. And I'm coming actually to the Ararat anomaly just right away here. It's right away.
Got it.
Now we know Ron Wyatt, the name Ron Wyatt. He visited the site. This is the Diripanur site, 1977, 79, 84. He had people with him, John Baumgartner, salvage expert David Fasold. They strongly advocated that the site was Noah's Ark. This is the Diripanur site, Joyce. And in 1996, Fasold, who was with Ron Wyatt and John Baumgartner, co-authored a paper with geologist Lawrence G. Collins, asserting that the site cannot have been Noah's Ark, nor even a man-made model. He's saying it's geological formation. So that's the Diripanur site. So there are problems with the Diripanur site. Just really quickly before we get to the Ararat anomaly, one problem with the Diripanur site is that the Bible specifically says, again, the Bible is exceedingly specific about the start of the flood, the duration of the flood, the time Noah and his family were in the ark, and the end of the flood. So here it says in Genesis chapter 8, the waters receded. This is verse 3. From off the earth continually, and after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. There are no vowels in the original language. It's RRT, and so those vowels are supplied. But the name Ararat, people understand this to be the mountain that was specified. The waters decreased continually until the 10th month. So the ark rested in the 7th month. On the 17th day of the month, the waters decreased until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. And so the water is going down. The ark is in its resting place. And it's not until a month and a half later, 2.5 months later, that the tops of the mountains are seen. And so the Daripanar site is only at 14,000 feet. And so if you picture the ark resting there, but it's not until 2.5 months later that the peaks of the mountains are seen. Well, how does that work exactly? Because if you're lower, you would see the mountains above you. You would see the peaks. And there were so problem number 2 with the Daripanar site is accessibility. It's easy to get to. And why is that an issue? Well, this is interesting because, how do you know where Mount Sinai is, for example? Well, a lot of people don't realize, but Mount Sinai was picked by Constantine's mother, who had been a pagan and then converted to Christianity. And she had a dream and said, this is where Mount Sinai is. But the current Mount Sinai doesn't fit the biblical description of Mount Sinai. That's very interesting because Mount Sinai is the mountain of God. Now it's a tourist site. People go up Mount Sinai and they have plastic 10 Commandments they sell there. There's another site that is over in Saudi Arabia called Jabal al-Lawz that fits the biblical account of Mount Sinai better than the other real Mount Sinai. And so is it possible that that God sort of puts his places kind of on the top shelf because he doesn't want them being turned into a tourist attraction? He doesn't want people, millions of people, walking up and down and treating the mountain of God so casually. And so you have this other site in Saudi Arabia. It's not the subject. Paul does say Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Now I know the boundaries were different, but you can go and do your own research on this.
Question.
The body. Yes, go ahead.
Ron Wyatt also says that he's found Mount Sinai. Is it one of those two that you've mentioned, or is it a different site?
No, and so it's the Jabal al-Lawz site,
Okay.
and there's a lot of evidence for Jabal al-Lawz being the real Mount Sinai.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hotly debated in academic and in Christian circles. But if you look at, and I don't have a presentation on this, but if you look at the location and the route that would be taken both to the mountain and then up to the land of Canaan and the Promised Land, it seems to fit the biblical account much better.
So the other Mount Sinai, they just call it Mount Sinai because Constantine's wife had a vision?
Yeah, his wife or his mother. I thought it was his mother, but maybe it was his wife.
Oh, okay.
But she had
okay.
Yeah, I thought it was the mother. And so anyway, she picked a number of biblical locations.
Oh.
And because she's close to power, that's where they drew the lines, right? This became Mount Sinai and that became whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's interesting. I just think it's notable that, when Moses died, of course he was resurrected. We're told in the book of Jude. But Moses didn't have a big entourage going up there for his funeral because God didn't want people worshiping the gravesite of Moses, and that is what the Hebrews tended to do. The bronze staff, the Nehushtan, the serpent on the staff. Later on, that was destroyed because they started worshiping it as an idol, and And so there are problems. The point is that there are problems with the Daripanar site. And isn't it interesting that you have all of this consistent evidence in the historical record going back centuries and even millennia, Joyce, which says that there is some object up there, that it's close to the summit, that it's encased in ice, and that it is only accessible during real hot weather. And so, with that said, let's turn to the Ararat anomaly. This is the 1949 photo of the Ararat anomaly. You can see something sticking out of the ice there, whether it's a natural formation or whether it's the arc, remains a subject of hot dispute. There's another picture of it, 1949. Again, this is a U.S. Air Force picture that was declassified pursuant to a Freedom of Information request. One of the things about the Ararat, the Ararat anomaly that some people say is that it can't be the arc because it's too big. It's just over 1,000 feet long. And the biblical record, they say, has a boat that's between 400 and 500 feet, max. But the interesting thing about the length of the arc is that if you use what's called an antediluvian cubit, and the cubit is the length of the time of the distance between a man's elbow to his fingertips or his wrist. I thought it was his fingertips. But if you look at that from an antediluvian perspective with a bigger cubit, it works out to be about 1,000 feet long. And so, is it possible that this is the arc and that it's been up there all along? Well, that's for you to decide here. It's another satellite image. And so you have the Ararat anomaly you can see on the left-hand side there. On the other side, you have what's called the Ahura Gorge. And the Ararat anomaly is that place that still no documented expedition has ever been to. And this is the site with something sticking out from underneath the glacier. Now, you can look this up. It's not a secret. It is a secret, but there's quite a bit of information that has been gathered over time. And there's a number of satellite images that have been taken. Some of them are on Wikipedia. And so there's a bird's eye view satellite image taken in 2003, was released to the public in 2006. There's images from the CIA, KH-9, Keyhole 9, 1973, Keyhole 11, 1976, and then again 1990 and 1992. It's been imaged by France's Spot satellite, September 1989. NASA Space Shuttle, 1994. And so this site has been documented for a long time. And they put together, this is a kind of a controversial bird's eye view of one of the satellite images. And I'll just play it here. There's no sound. So this is constructed. It's 3D imaging based on the satellite photo of the area. Friend of mine just texted that Josephus mentioned the ark, and that's true. He does in his book Jewish Antiquities, and he references the Babylonian author as well. And so that's the bird's eye view of it. And some people say that object right there, where the ridge is, that is Noah's Ark.
So it's covered there, so you can't really see it there.
That's correct. That's correct. So again, here's Keyhole 9 image, 1973. Now, I want to read you, because I think that some of your listeners who have heard this story and who have read up on this subject, some of you have heard the name George Hagopian. And so it was during the time of the research for the book, The Ark File, that Rennie Norbergen interviewed George Hagopian. And there's a big group that used to exist. I don't know if it still exists anymore. It was called Search. And they were looking for evidence of Noah's Ark. And they tried to do a number of expeditions. And they interviewed George Hagopian a year before he died. And the significance of George Hagopian's account is that he was an Armenian living relatively near Mount Ararat. They called it Massis, the holy mountain. He was a shepherd. And I want you to hear his account as given to Rennie Norbergen, because and I should say George Hagopian was subjected to a polygraph test, right? Lie detector, or at least the recording was analyzed for stress, and he passed the test. So this is from an excerpt from a book called The Ark File. All right, you can order it online. And it contains this account on page 165. Who is this published by? It's published by Pacific Press.
Yeah, because I think George Vandeman.
Yeah, so published by Pacific Press, Mountain View, California.
Didn't George Vandeman, wasn't he part of that? Didn't he go try to research this?
Yes, George Vandeman was part of an expedition over to Mount Ararat. And the account is in the Ark File. And I believe they went to the Daripanar site, and they were supremely disappointed with it when they saw it. And most of them concluded it was a geological formation, and they were not allowed to dig. And so they went home, and there was sort of a report.
This
Yes.
is really interesting. I think I did a book report on this in 8th grade.
Fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, so.
No, I mean, like Leonard Nimoy says at the beginning, it's the greatest archaeological search in the world. And there's all these rumors for centuries. Anyways, here is the account of George Hagopian. With your permission, I'm going to read it, if that's okay. So don't fall asleep. Okay. So Rennie Norbergen meets George Hagopian. He's got another guy from Search with him, and they meet in this diner. And George Hagopian starts talking about his time as an Armenian shepherd and his uncle. And at the time of this story, you have different accounts of how old exactly he was, whether he was 8 or 10 years old. It was a long time ago. He was 70 years old at the time that he met the author of the Ark File. And so some people say, well, if he was 8 or 10 years old, he's way too young to be going up Mount Ararat. Not so fast. I have relatives. I know kids who are 10 and 11 years old, 9 years old, and they can go all day and they never get tired, just about, and they will carry enormous amounts of weight. In fact, I went fossil hunting once with 3 young kids and my wife, and we were picking up fossilized wood, petrified wood, and these specimens weighed between 20 and 30 pounds. And this 10-year-old kid carried a piece of petrified wood out for a long ways, at least a half a mile in his arms, 30 pounds away, and never even blink. And so you can't compare George Hagopian as an 8 or 10-year-old to the people of today. He lived outdoors. He was an Armenian shepherd. He was constantly on the move, and he was a tough kid. So here's the story without further ado. Page 165, the Ark File. Then the wolves would come, and we'd burn the campfires higher to keep our sheep safe. The dogs would run and bark all night, checking the flocks, scaring the wolves that would come down the mountain to catch just one little lamb. George paused, and I quickly threw in a question, hoping he'd now talk about the artifact. Were you with your uncle when you first saw the Ark? I asked. Yes, I first went there when I was about 10 years old. It must have been about 1902. My grandfather was the minister of the big Armenian Orthodox Church in Van, and he always told me stories about the holy ship on the holy mountain. Then one day my uncle said, Georgie, I'm going to take you to the holy mountain. And he took me with him, packed his supplies on his donkey, and together we started our trek towards Mount Ararat. Uncle, that's the holy mountain, I said, pointing to what seemed to be our destination up ahead of us. That's right, Georgie, he said. Massis is the holy mountain. That's what they called Ararat, was Massis. My feet were getting sore, and the donkey kept wanting to go in the wrong direction, but we continued climbing until we got about halfway. Then Uncle took both supplies and me on his back, and we climbed and climbed. It took us almost 8 days from the time we left Van to the moment we got to the place on the holy mountain where both my grandfather and my uncle had said the holy ship had come to rest. I guess my uncle took me there that year because it was a year without much snow, Hagopian said. A smooth year, we called it. There's one of those about every 20 years. And then we got to the Ark. George stopped, groping for the exact words to describe his recollections as clearly as he could. I said, Uncle, it's so dark around here, nothing but mist. Is this the top of the world? Did the Ark rest all the way up here? Yes, he said, this is the Holy Ark, this big ship right in front of you. Let me help you get on it. An immense stone mass loomed threateningly ahead of me. It was like a wall, like a building. It couldn't be. It didn't look like a ship. Is this really the ship, Uncle? I asked, touching the towering object. This is stone, not wood. It's the ship, all right, Georgie, he answered. Come help me. I'll prove it to you. He dropped his pack to the ground, and together he and I began to haul stones and huge boulders to the side of the ship. Uncle was a big man, well over 6 feet tall and very powerful, and within a short time he had stacked a pile of rocks against the side of the ship. Higher and higher we piled them until at last he told me to stop. Georgie, come here, he said, grabbing me playfully by the arm. You are going on top of the Holy Ark. He lifted me up and put me on his shoulders, and together we climbed the pile of rocks. When he had reached the top, his hands grabbed my ankles and he began to push me up. Reach for the top, Georgie, he yelled. Grab the edge and pull yourself up. A tear welled up in the old Armenian's eyes. He was reliving those nostalgic moments all over again and didn't care whether his emotions were showing. It was his youth he was recalling, and without us as a sounding board, it would have only been a voiceless memory. But now it had life, and he continued. I stood up straight and looked all over the ship. It was long, all right. I realized that things always seem larger to a child, but looking back now, I am sure it must have been at least 1,000 feet long and more than 600 feet wide. The height was about 40 feet or more. Look inside the ark, my uncle called up to me. Look for the holes. Look for the big one. Look inside and tell me what you see. I shivered from the cold and from fear and glanced around me. Yes, there was the hole, big and gaping. Was that the one he meant? It looked so mysterious. Uncle, I'm scared, I yelled down to him. I see a large black hole in the top. Don't make me go in there, please. Don't be scared, Georgie, he said. There's no one in the ark. It's been empty for a long time. Don't worry about it. I peeked into the blackness of the hole but saw nothing. Then I knelt down and kissed the holy ark. Did you see anything else while you were up there? I interrupted him. Any other distinguishing marks that we might use for identification if and when we locate the object? George Hagopian nodded his head affirmatively. His eyes glistened with excitement. Oh, yes, many things. There's the moss, that green growth that covers the entire ark. Also, when we were there, the top of the ark was covered with a very thin coat of fresh fallen snow. But when I brushed some of it away, I could see the green moss growing right on top. When I pulled a piece off, it looked as if the rock was made of wood. The grain was right there, this green moss. It made the ark feel soft and moldy. My uncle took his gun and shot into the side of the ark, but the bullet wouldn't penetrate. It just dropped when it hit the side. The whole ark was petrified, turned to rock. Did you see anything on the roof besides one large hole? Yes, I remember small holes running all the way from the front to the back. I don't know exactly how many, but there must have been at least 50 of them running down the middle with small intervals in between. After describing the holes to my uncle, I said, "What are these for, Uncle?" "They're holes for air," Georgie said. "A long time ago, there used to be animals and people in the ark, and that's why they had those holes in there. There's one special hole, too, where Noah let the dove fly out." "Where did they all go, Uncle?" I asked. "They just left, Georgie," he said. "They're gone. The holy ship is completely empty now." Uncle pulled his long hunting knife from his belt, and with the heavy handle, he chipped a piece from the side of the ark. "Uncle, I want to get off," I yelled down to him. "I'm scared. Will you catch me?" "Sure, but don't jump too wildly." So I let myself down the side of the ship until I felt his hands take my ankles in a firm grip. Gently, he let me down, and together we went back down the mountainside. The first thing I did when I arrived in Van was to see my grandfather. Grandfather, I've been to the Holy Ark, I said proudly, filled with enthusiasm. Uncle took me up there. I've been on it. I've looked into the hole. Overcome by the news, Grandfather hugged me, misty-eyed. Georgie, someday you will become a holy man, he whispered, trying to keep his voice from breaking. You will be a holy man because you've been on God's holy ark. He never found out whether his dream for me ever came true. For a few years later, he died at Van. Intriguing as the story was, the details of the sighting were a bit too hazy, and for another 3 hours, Errol Cummings and I grilled Hagopian in a friendly way, extracting more facts, especially those that could be useful in our search for the ship's exact location. By sifting and comparing his various statements, we were able to zero in on precise questions, and George was more than willing to supply the answers from his slowly fading memory. I saw the Ark a second time, he recalled. I think it was in 1904. We were on the mountain looking for holy flowers, and I went back to the Ark and looked, and it looked still the same. Nothing had changed. I didn't get to the top that time, but stayed at the side and really got a good look at it. It was resting on a steep ledge of bluish-green rock about 3,000 feet wide. Another thing I noticed was that I didn't see any nails at all. It seemed that the whole ship was made of one piece of petrified wood. I could even see the grain of the wood, even though the ship had already turned to stone. How about windows and doors? I asked. Oh no, there was no windows in the ship. Of that I am certain, he answered emphatically, his mind's eye roaming the sides of the ship, and there was definitely no door in the side of the ship that I could see. No opening of any kind. There may have been one in the part I couldn't see, but that I don't know. That side was practically inaccessible. I could only see my side and part of the bow. What was the shape of the ship? Was it perfectly straight? Was it rectangular or what? Hagopian paused for a moment before answering, for the waitress had come by to pick up our soup bowls. George waited until she was gone. That roof was flat with the exception of that narrow raised section running all the way from the bow to the stern with all those holes in it. The sides were slanting outward to the top, and the front was flat. You know, I didn't see any real curves. It was unlike any other boat I had ever seen. It looked more like a flat-bottom barge. But the location, George, can you describe the location of the ship on the mountain? Are there any specific landmarks? The answer came slowly but unhesitatingly. I do remember that one of the sides of the mountain is impossible to climb. My uncle and I went through Bayazit, close to the border, and climbed the mountain from the direct shore of Azerbaijan. I recalled trees and orchards somewhere between 10 and 15,000 feet on the mountain. We used to eat the fruit whenever we could. I'm sure that if the scenery hasn't changed too much, I could take you right to the spot. But at my age, climbing masses may not be that easy. And then they asked him, what about wood? And he says, any wood that's found is not real. That's not from the Ark because the Ark is petrified. Also, that site at 14,000 feet is too low. The place that I was much higher. The real Ark is petrified. I do know it's on the mountain. And so they talked to him a little bit more about whether it's here or whether it's there. He was a child. He couldn't remember. The maps were different back then. And he basically says, come back and talk to me again. He had a strong handshake, a too strong handshake for a man his age. He says, perhaps I'll go back one day. But he died the following year. Now, I find it very interesting that the accounts of this area, from the accounts of the peasants who say that they've been there, all say that you can only go when it's August or September, and you can only go when it's really hot and dry. Interestingly enough, I did a quick search on what the weather was like in 1948 when that peasant apparently went up the mountain, and it was a very hot, dry year. And interestingly enough, this year they're forecasting a super El Nino, and that the La Nina in the ocean is collapsing and that there's going to be massive warming. Some of them are saying it's not just going to be a super El Nino, but it is going to be a Godzilla El Nino. So it's going to be hot, it's going to be dry potentially in that area of the world, and maybe the area will be open and more pictures will become available. I don't know. El Nino, they call it an ENSO, El Nino Southern Oscillation. That's coming. Now, but I promised giants. What about the giants? Now, you should know that there are well over 1,000 articles from North America dating back a lot for the last 150 years about bodies of large human beings being found. Some of them have been taken to the Smithsonian, apparently, but you ask the Smithsonian, and they say there's no record of it. But it's been reported in the newspapers. There's even a book compiling all these articles together that you can get, and you can look at the newspaper stories about the findings of giants. And interestingly enough, some of those giants are said to have 6 fingers and a double row of teeth, the skeletons. And these are details that follow the stories whenever you hear about giants, that they have a double row of teeth. That's interesting. You're thinking to yourself, well, I don't have a double row of teeth. Nobody has a double row of teeth. Turn with me in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 6, and you'll see something interesting. You hear these references in the Bible to giants. There's lots of references. Goliath was a giant. Anak was a giant, and his sons, the Anakim. Og was a giant, and Og slept on a bed that was massive. It was at least 12 feet long. And he fell to the Hebrews as they were conquering the promised land, according to the biblical narrative. If you look at the ancient city of Hebron, the archaeologists have found massive boulders and a massive wall. And that was a city that was known to be the city of the giants in the scriptures. And so there are all of these biblical references. And then in Genesis chapter, yes, go ahead.
Was Adam a giant? Wasn't he only like 9 foot or something?
So
was he bigger than that? Or was he like, I mean, if Og was like 12 feet, was he bigger than Adam?
So according to the spirit of prophecy, Goliath was 12 feet tall, approximately 12 feet tall. And so you could just imagine, Goliath would not even fit through your front door without getting on his hands and knees, if he could fit at all. And there is a lot of speculation. Again, Joyce, I didn't come to talk about the science of why people were bigger before the flood. In fact, why everything was bigger. But you've heard the rumors. You know what some of the scientists say, that the Earth was encased in a canopy of water, that it filtered the ultraviolet radiation out, that you had increased oxygen and decreased harmful ultraviolet rays. And the giants in the land of Canaan, in the promised land, some of them, most of them, or all of them, lived below sea level in areas where there would have been increased atmospheric pressure, where the oxygen was very dense. And that may explain why there was giants. But the Bible specifically says in Genesis chapter 6, and this is cited by a lot of Christians today who believe in the Nephilim.
Right.
It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, they were fair, and they took them wives of all that they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And so, Joyce, there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of AI generated video on YouTube about the Nephilim, these giants who are there, and they're supposedly the product of the demons who were cast out of heaven, and human beings, and that when they mated together, that they had these large offspring. But that's not what the Bible is saying at all. That's a fiction. What the Bible is saying is that there was a separation between the descendants of Seth and the descendants of Cain. And when they came together eventually, after centuries, and had children, the reintroduced genetic vitality resulted in bigger people. And so it's always fascinating to me that there's a lot of Christians these days who talk about the Nephilim and that demons mated with human beings. but they don't believe in the literal creation. They don't believe in the Bible, but they're willing to believe in the Nephilim.
Mhm.
That there was the product. Angels cannot mate with human beings. In fact, angels do not procreate, according to Jesus in the New Testament.
Mhm.
And so they can't have babies with human beings. That's a myth. That's a fiction.
Right.
Um, However, it's fascinating that modern science has discovered that human beings have a third set of teeth. And that's very interesting. Now, this is relatively new research. You see the date on the article over there, February 15th, 2026. They've known about this for a while. But you say to yourself, well, giants and a double row of teeth. I don't have a double row of teeth. Yes, you do. You do have a double row of teeth. They're little nubs and they're underneath your gum. But every human being is born with a third set of teeth. And that's fascinating because not only are the rumors of the giants that were found, do they have a second row of teeth, right? Because you have your baby teeth, they fall out, and then you have a permanent set. But if you have longevity, like is talked about in the flood, it stands to reason that God would give you another set of teeth if you're going to live to be 900 years old. So that's a fascinating thing. In fact, Japanese scientists are have isolated a protein that prevents those teeth from growing, and they are developing a medicine, a drug that will suppress that protein, so that in the case that you want to have a natural tooth grow to replace an old tooth, that you will be able to do that. And they're saying that's going to be available by 2030. But the point is that is it possible that humanity has a latent um, intrinsic characteristic in their DNA that is not triggered or does not manifest because the environmental factors are no longer the same as what they were when this trait existed? And yes, it absolutely is. And everything was bigger before the flood. The fossil record proves this. The insects were bigger, most of the insects, and you had uh, bigger animals, even apart from the dinosaurs. And so, people argue about who the giants were. We're coming to this here, but you see here in Dentistry Today, the scientists noting that humans have a third set of teeth available as buds. So you actually have a third set of teeth. We all do. And that's just very, very interesting. Now, who were the giants? You hear about aliens, you have ancient origins. Where does humanity come from? Is it the Nephilim? Are the giants the Nephilim or the Anunnaki? I just want to draw a few more points here before I close. Who were the giants? They were your ancestors. That's who they were. But evolution has so brainwashed people that to think that we are progressing as opposed to deteriorating, that it does not even dawn on most Christians that their ancestors were the biblical giants who lived before the flood. Was Adam bigger than the people now? Absolutely, he was. And his children were bigger, and they lived much longer, and they were smart. They were highly intelligent, and that's a whole other subject for a different presentation. But our race is deteriorating, Joyce, because of sin. Humanity's lifespan is decreasing, not increasing. We are de-evolving. We are not evolving. We are unraveling genetically. And our race is dying. It's not getting better. We're degrading physically, morally, and spiritually. Every generation has a fall, so to speak, where it deteriorates further. And Jesus himself said that if that time was not shortened with the time of trouble, that no flesh would survive, because we are unraveling. That's just the facts of it. You look at the scientist Jacques Cousteau, for example, decades ago was saying that humanity doesn't have long. that the genetics of human beings are deteriorating, that our environment is degrading, that everything is coming apart at the seams, and that we don't have much time left. And so, what the Bible teaches is that you're being lied to about the past. There's no doubt about that. The Bible teaches that we were created in the image of God, that your first parents were created in a conditionally immortal state, that it was God's intention for them to live forever, and that they fell, and that God himself became a sacrifice to pay for their sin, that the Lamb was slain from the foundation of the world and a covering for the sins of humanity, and that the invitation is to come and ask forgiveness for sins and be covered by the blood of Jesus Christ. There's no doubt you're being lied to about the present. That's not a secret. You were lied to about COVID. You're lied to about Epstein. You're lied to about UFOs and and a host of other things. We're constantly being lied to. We live in a world of lies. And you're definitely being lied to about the future, because the narrative is that this world is moving on a trajectory to a new golden age, when the Bible clearly uses the metaphor of the flood to say that this world is going to be destroyed for the same reason that it was destroyed the first time, by water, and the second time by fire. And so, and all of that is couched in the invitation of mercy. The world has forgotten the creation narrative. Christianity barely believes in the creation narrative. And that's why you have the three angels' messages at the end. Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who created the heavens and the earth and the seas and the fountain of waters. Right? God is the creator God. And it's judgment time. There's going to be accountability. And the invitation of mercy is open today. Today is the day of salvation. And I think that one day, perhaps this year, perhaps next year, perhaps soon, I think that Noah's Ark will be found, and it will confirm the book. And people would not even believe. Jesus says nobody would believe. People won't believe even if one rises from the dead. That's literally true, because Jesus rose from the dead, and lots of people won't believe. But the Bible confirms the past, the origins of our race, your origin, that you are created in the image of God, that you're important to God, that your life has meaning, that you're not just the product of evolution of a lobster, which is a ridiculous fairy tale to begin with. Why would Jesus die for the lobsters? So the two ideas are irreconcilable, evolution and creation. You have to pick a side. Either you're on the Bible side or you're on Darwin's side, where there's no meaning to life and you're an accident, and this life is all there is, and there's nothing else. And there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no God, and there's no such thing as right or wrong. But the Bible doesn't teach any of those things. It explains the origins of humanity, explains salvation and God's invitation to you, his sacrifice for you, and what is about to happen on this earth. And so the story of Noah's Ark is part of a bigger picture. And that's the end of the presentation, Joyce.